Okay, hey folks, this is Mark Locklear here with a quick screencast on chapter 12, and this one will be really quick because I think there's not, in my opinion, there's not a ton to discuss, but I'll sort of walk through some of the high points of the chapter. But this is how to create views, and let me share this desktop. And so views are essentially, I like to think of them as saved or prepackaged queries. And these are actually saved inside the database, right? So think about, I mean, you all have seen up to this point, whether it's certainly when we began the class, having to populate the databases that you're working on. You modified some of the SQL scripts so you could create and populate the databases. You've probably ran queries that you've either copied in maybe from the book or from the sample exercises. So you can imagine, rather than having queries saved in a text file somewhere and copying and pasting them into the console window, what views do is essentially allows you to have those queries saved inside the database. And then you can actually call them from within other queries if you like. So that's essentially what views are. So how do views work? Pretty simple. I mean, the bulk of this is obviously the select statements that we've already been doing. So we simply call the create view command, and then we're going to give it a name. So in this case, we're naming this view vendors underscore min. And then you have this as keyword, and then the select statements and anything that follow that are sort of typical queries that we've been running up to this point. So this is how we create a view. And then if we want to call that view, here's an example here. We just do select from, and then you're calling from that vendor's min view that we just previously created. And then in this case, we've got a where clause here where vendor state is equal to California. Now, if you want, you could just run this select star from vendor's min, and it's going to essentially all it's going to do is run this select statement that you see here. So that's sort of the high points of, or that's the syntax of how you call views. Benefits of views. So this is, again, a lot of this is more advanced SQL stuff. I'll be honest, in a production environment, I've never used views before. So it really just depends. You know, in a web development environment, usually the framework, all of your, you know, thinking about the use case here of having queries that are already saved inside the database, rather than doing it into the database. I certainly have saved queries, but those queries are saved inside the code, inside the application code base, rather than inside the database. But again, thinking about, again, a more sophisticated environment where you have, you know, a very robust database with database administrators, I think, you know, that's where you're probably going to see views at. Here on page 375, I'm just looking at a couple, or 377, the benefits, design independence. So here you sort of have this level of, I don't want to call it obfuscation necessarily, because you're not, you know, you're not trying to be cagey about the way you're hiding things, but there's a level of exposure to external users that you might not want. Now, in this case, when we say external users, I'm not thinking about like people who use your application, but even within a database team. Let's say you have people who are in your database running queries against the database, like inside the console. Let's say there's certain tables that you might not want them to have access to. So again, creating views and having these prepackaged queries that they can call or call as a part of other queries is a way to sort of limit the exposure they've got to certain tables inside of a database. The second thing they mention here is data security. Again, the same thing here. Views restrict access to tables and certain data that otherwise a user might have to have. Simplified queries, again, you've probably saw some examples of that in the book when they show examples of nested queries, and we've looked at nested queries in the past. So again, having these prepackaged queries that you can nest or have as a part of a larger query certainly is going to simplify a query a lot more rather than having to put all of your code in a single query. And then they've got updatability as one of the advantages here. And so again, with updatability, what we're talking about is just the ability to modify and update a query. So with certain restrictions, views can be used to update, insert, and delete data. So yeah, not just being able to update an individual query, but also being able to call update, insert, and delete statements, inside queries that are already saved. So I think that's yeah, those are all advantages of views. And then the last thing I'm just going to talk about is this idea of this with check option clause. So this is an interesting one, but super powerful in that it's going to limit a view's ability to run or a query to run based on whether it updates particular rows or not. In fact, I'll use the language it's got here. It says so the with check option clause can prevent an update if it causes the row to be excluded from the view. And if you really work through, I had to actually spend a little bit of time working through this to make sure I understood what it was doing here. But the sort of key to this is this where clause here, that this in this case, it displays data where invoice total minus payment total minus credit total is going to be greater than or equal to 0. So you can see this first example it gives. First, you've got a select statement where you can see the result set here. And so in this case, and again, the invoice total, credit total, and payment total is what I want you to focus on here. Now notice we've got this update statement. In this case, it updates payment total to 400. So you can see this query ran as expected. So notice again, our invoice total is around 20K, credit total is 1,200, payment total is 400. Now, notice when we try to update the payment total to 30,000, notice we get this check option failed. And the reason that is again, if you try to subtract 30,000 from 20,000, it's going to fail, right? And again, go back up here to our math. Invoice total minus payment total minus credit total is greater than 0. And in this case, if we subtract invoiced total from payment total, it's going to actually fail, right? I mean, it's essentially because 30,000 is greater than 20,000. So trying to subtract 30,000 from 20,000, that's going to leave you with a negative $10,000 balance, right? So again, you can imagine a scenario where you're trying to enforce certain restrictions on payment total. You don't want to go in the red. In this case, the client would owe you 10,000. So you could imagine a scenario where you could have a restriction like this in place. So an update can happen that's going to end up showing a negative balance inside your database for a particular vendor. Okay, so that's sort of how that works. Again, we're not. I don't even think you have any exercises necessarily that where you have to use this with check option, but just know that it's there, and it's something you could encounter out in the real world. Okay, that is really all that I have. Again, views or something. Just again, I would think in a more sophisticated database environment, you might encounter these. This is probably stuff that's in the realm of database administrators. Often, if you're again working in a web development environment or something like that, where you're doing application development and you're having to interact with a database through a front end application, you're probably not probably often not going to use views, but just know that they're there. Views would probably be something, again, if you're playing an application developer's role, you might have to interface with a database administrator about, probably not something you're going to have to work with in a real intimate way, but just know what it is. So in case you ever do encounter it out into the real world, you'll have some knowledge and understanding of what that is. Okay, that's all I have for now. If you have any questions, just let me know.